Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you very much for tuning in this week where we're talking about the Canadian Grand Prix. Another F1 doubleheader done and dusted. It's gone pretty quickly, very quickly indeed, and also some Supercars coming as well later with the Darwin Triple Crown. A very eventful weekend and a bit of news to cover off there as well. But Canada, how good to see F1 back in Canada. Was, a pretty decent race, probably like a 7 out of 10 race, I'd say, if we're doing some ratings. Exciting in the fact that, we had a good qualifying mixed in the wet conditions, but then in the race it was kind of like normal services resumed as far as the dominance, or like super, you could call it dominance, I guess, dominant form that Red Bull in at the moment, and Max Verstappen as well, which I'll cover off. But it was exciting at the end of the race that a late safety car actually re-energized it, in the fact that it brought Carlos Sainz into the mix as well to go for his maiden F1 win, but unfortunately that did not happen in the end. Max, let's talk about Max, and probably don't talk about Max, with all the superlatives and adjectives as much as, other people do. I do want to put it out there how much, I admire and respect him. I think this was the first weekend after Canada where I started seeing shades of Sebastian Vettel when he was in his pomp at Red Bull. And the fact that, Red Bull think that this guy is going to be, he's going to go beyond Vettel in terms of achievements potentially in his career, and just the form that he's in at the moment. He put in that epic lap for pole position as well, ahead of Fernando Alonso, Fernando Alonso on the front row of the grid, first time in 10 years that had happened, and then Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton there on the second row, the Haas cars as well, third row of the grid in the wet qualifying session, which we'll touch on. And it's just that, I'm not gonna come out as some bona fide Max fanboy or whatever. There's enough of them out there. You don't need another one in the world, and I'm not certainly going to become a Max fanboy, but it doesn't take away from the fact that how good he is at the moment, the form that he's in. It's just so incredible, and it's in a way like you can't really brush under the carpet the last dominant driver that we've had over the last 8 years, and that was Lewis Hamilton. It's not saying, now he's gone, it's Max's time to be in the headlines. Hamilton is still there, his achievements are still very relevant and everything, but, Max is a different entity, and it's kind of, the whole thing about Max when he came into F1 and all the prophecies, if you like, about, his talent and everything. We're starting to see it, and it feels like Max has been around forever, and he's still, only 23, 24, still very young. I probably got that wrong. He's probably 25. I don't know. You can correct me on that. But he is in that rich vein of form at the moment, and with the Red Bull being so reliable as well, and this is what I talked about last week, in terms of Ferrari in the championship battle. I don't think there's any weakness at the moment in Verstappen or Red Bull's game, so it's going to be very difficult for them to be beaten this season. Mentioned Fernando Alonso. Unfortunately, the race didn't turn out as well as it could have been for him, but seeing him qualify on the front row of the grid in those wet conditions, we kind of got teased a lot earlier this season, and I think back to Australia, to Melbourne, where everyone thought he could have been on for pole if he didn't crash out or whatever, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but that didn't happen. He ended up on the front row here. It sadly didn't work out for him in the race. Lewis Hamilton having a much more stronger weekend this time out. That's a whole nother thing as well, which I'll discuss later on in the show. The Haas cars as well, putting in a great performance. Mick Schumacher getting his first top 6 in qualifying and his best ever qualifying in F1. Sadly, again, the race didn't turn out as they would have liked to have had, with some first points coming his way. Neither of the Haases finished in the points, as a matter of fact, so that's pretty dismal for them. But race gets underway. We have virtual safety car out on lap 10 because reliability problems hit Red Bull. As much as I was saying earlier that, Red Bull look invincible at the moment, they did have a problem for Sergio Perez. Gearbox failure seemed to have caused that DNF there, and Checo had a bit of a messy weekend in general. He crashed out in Q2, didn't make it through to the top 10 in qualifying, and just did not seem to be as, one with the car as Max was in Canada. And we've seen some heroics from Checo in the past. I know I mentioned before the race that 2012, the last time Alonso was on the front row, even though that was the German Grand Prix, but 2012 Canadian Grand Prix, Checo qualified 15th and was able to finish on the podium. That didn't happen, I'm afraid, but it was quite pivotal, his retirement in the race, and the fact that we got a virtual safety car early. It brought in some of the drivers for an early pit stop, including Max and then Hamilton as well. What could have been a one-stop race, and it was a one-stop race for some of the drivers. The fact that they came in that early on lap 10 meant that they would either do, a really bad one-stop, going back to the Will Joseph, Lando Norris conversation from the last race in Baku, or, they'll have to go to a two-stop. So the fact that, that happened, and possibly luck into having a two-stop with another safety car later on down the track, really made it a bit confusing and just, exciting at the start of the race that, okay, well, if they've done this, what are Ferrari going to do? Because they didn't come in at that time. We saw another virtual safety car out on lap 20, which saw the rest of the field pretty much pit except for Alonso, who stayed on the mediums for a rather long time, and then also Charles Leclerc, who had the engine penalty or power unit penalty over him. Now, originally it was a 10-place penalty. They came into the weekend, they changed more components, which threw him to the back of the grid, so they threw him on hard tyres for the race and sent him on his way, see how far he could get. I think their projections was for like third or something. And that second VSC was out for Mick Schumacher, unfortunately, who came to a grinding halt at the side of the track. I think everyone's hearts kind of broke at that moment because he was on for potentially finishing in the top 10 and getting his first points in F1, but that opportunity was lost in that moment, unfortunately. And then the race kind of peters on a little bit. We get to lap 44. We see Max come in for a second stop just prior to a safety car coming out on lap 49, because we had Yuki Tsunoda come out too hot from the pit lane and crash at turn 1. Bit of a silly mistake. He just couldn't get the car turned and it kind of just drove off or whatever. We had a full safety car. Carlos Sainz came in, switched to the medium tyres. He was able to benefit as well from having fresh tyres and the field being compressed. I don't think if he had stayed in the lead, or if he had not pitted and stayed in the lead and had the track position, that he would have been able to hold off Max in the end. So, Ferrari took the gamble, brought him in on for fresh tyres, sent him back out, and what that set up was the end of the race, where we had Max leading, Sainz behind within DRS range until lap 70, and no matter what Carlos did, he could not make the move. He could not get past, and whether you want to sit on the side of the fence that says, Sainz is not hard enough, he doesn't have the killer instinct, yada yada, or you could say Max just was unflappable in that situation, and you could have put, someone like Hamilton behind him, and still there would be no difference in that. So, that's for you guys to decide. I want to praise Sainz for the weekend he's had. It's probably his best weekend so far in 2022. It's been such a difficult season for him, and the fact that he's already become the face of many memes this season. That's pretty embarrassing. The fact that he's not going to be taken seriously in that respect. But for him to put in a good weekend, to finish second overall, yes, it's devastating that he couldn't go through and pull through for the win, but this seemed to have this weekend seemed to have given him enough confidence to say, hey, look, even though my teammate's not up here, I could probably fight with the likes of the Red Bulls in the future. So we'll see where that happens. Fastest lap as well for Carlos. The fact that he got that extra point too helps in that respect, taking him away from Red Bull and helping Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship in whichever way they can. Apologies for that. Didn't have my afternoon nap today, so feeling a bit tired. Max, so we also had Hamilton on the podium as well. First time he's been on the podium since the start of the season in Bahrain. So Hamilton pretty much mirrored the strategy that Max was on and was just had the pace to stay up there. And, his teammate George Russell was behind on a different strategy. And a big improvement for Mercedes from Friday in particular, because Friday both drivers, or Hamilton in particular, came out and said, oh, the car's undrivable, this is terrible. And this is coming off the back of Baku and all the nonsense there about the bouncing issues and the fact that the FIA have to step in and do something about it. Now, like I said last time, it was announced that the FIA were going to intervene on safety grounds and whatnot, and what they implemented was the fact that they would have power to tell teams to change their setups if they find that the cars are bouncing too much. So this is probably not the news Mercedes would have wanted specifically, but it also didn't hamper teams that have done it right, because that's still the way I believe on it, without having any bias towards particular teams, is that we've got teams who suffer from the porpoising or the bouncing phenomenon. Then we've got teams who don't suffer from it as much. Why should we change regulations mid-season to suit the teams that suffer from it more, kind of thing? It's so silly. And the fact then Mercedes as well, which, with a bit of deep diving or whatever, I realised as well, they came prepared for this change that they implemented about having a second rod or something, or stay, I think it's called, on the floor attached to the side pods, which, all the other teams said, well, we would not have been able to be prepared to bring that, given the timeline between the FIA announcing this new directive and the first practice in Montreal. Granted that Mercedes didn't run it all weekend, they had it in the first couple of practice sessions and then ditched it for the rest of the race, but it kind of raised a few eyebrows about, maybe they had some insider knowledge that this was going to happen and whatnot. And then there was this whole meeting and argument that happened as well in the weekend between Toto Wolff, Christian Horner, Mattia Binotto. There was Netflix cameras there as well, so nothing good is meant to come of it, but there was some heated exchanges from Wolff and Horner and stuff. So I think maybe they're just trying to drum up something for the television audience or for the Netflix viewers. But seriously, the way I see it at the end of the day is that, again, if they're going to make changes, do it for the next season or whatever, and don't do it to disadvantage the teams that have got it right. Even Verstappen came out and said that, I think it's kind of stupid that it's up to the other teams to fix the situation rather than, disadvantage the ones who've done the good job. Had, Mercedes, for example, had got it right. I'm not saying that, it's all to do with Mercedes, but let's go back to 2014 and the fact that, the hybrid power units and everything, Mercedes were the one team that seemed to have struck gold with it, and everyone else did. Would everyone else have complained to try and let them catch up? They did, but did the FIA change anything? No. So in this instance as well, it's kind of well, you can bark as loud as you want, but nothing should come of it, kind of thing. If it did, then it would be quite disappointing because it shouldn't be pandering just to what Mercedes want, for example. So no disrespect to Mercedes, I have a lot of respect and admiration for Mercedes. So you can't be accused of you just hate Lewis and you hate Mercedes and grow up, people, grow up. So they seemed a lot more competitive is the answer to the question. Oh, I don't even know what question it was anymore. Mercedes were just more competitive, and they looked to be building on a platform, with what they found in Baku as well. After Baku, I should say. Next up for them, Silverstone, important race for Lewis Hamilton, important race for Russell as well, being in a competitive car. So, hopefully they'll do well. If not, then that's gonna cause all sorts of backlash in that instance. But it was good to see them somewhat better, and also for Hamilton to be in a bit more of a better mood as well. So his experience around this track, he loves Montreal, of course. That would have counted for a bit as well for his third place, which was well deserved in the end. Behind those guys, we had Charles Leclerc finishing 5th from last, so he executed a perfect one-stop strategy. He got stuck behind Esteban Ocon and some other drivers at times, and it looked very difficult for him to overtake, and that could have been a car-specific thing or whatever, but like the fact that, Sainz couldn't get past Verstappen at the end on fresher tyres, and Leclerc not being able to do it either could mean it's a car thing. But it was a good race for him to cement some points. It's still not looking good for them championship-wise, Constructors' Championship terms. Ferrari are that far behind Red Bull that it's looking pretty dire. But also, when you look at where Leclerc is to Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship as well, it's looking pretty diabolical. Just trying to do the calculations here. I thought I would have done it before. But 49 points, is the difference between those two at the moment. And when you consider the gap that Leclerc had after Australia, 46 points, that's a 96 or 90-something point, maths is not my strong suit, 90-something point swing, in the space of a few races. It's incredible to see that pendulum just go the other way completely. But, I think Ferrari will be buoyed by that. And hopefully they can get their reliability together to try and get some points back. Otherwise, 5th was all he could manage in that race. Ocon moving up to 6th from his 7th place qualifying, so he was the best placed Alpine at the end of the day because Fernando Alonso ended the race with a time penalty, 5-second time penalty for weaving, I think, at the end of the race ahead of Valtteri Bottas, so the stewards didn't really take kindly to that. He dropped 2 places to 9th, and he also had an engine problem as well, which meant that he had to finish. He was going to be finishing behind Ocon anyway, but now got demoted to 9th. Great race for the Alfa Romeos too, 7th and 8th, with Valtteri Bottas ahead of Guan Yu Zhou. And good on Guan Yu Zhou, because, as hard as people can be on, as harsh as critics can be, I feel like there's no real virtue or purpose behind criticizing this guy. Yes, Oscar Piastri would have been great to throw in F1 this year instead of the guy who finished runner-up to him or whatever and hasn't really achieved a lot in F2, but he's doing his best in this first season. He's had a lot of reliability problems and a lot of bad luck. He put in a great performance in the wet to get the car into Q3 first of all, and then to be able to hang on and score points as well. That was great. So I think he'll be buoyed by that too. Bottas nailed the one stop as well to get himself up into 7th, as did, Lance Stroll as well on home soil to get into P10. And that was kind of heartbreaking because he kind of passed Daniel Ricciardo at the end and, relegated Ricciardo to 11th. So a bit of a tough weekend for McLaren all round, with Lando Norris having suffered due to that stack in the pit lane. The team didn't have tyres ready, so he pretty much fell down the order into 15th, and then Ricciardo finishing in 11th, not getting any points either, which was rather sad. Had Sebastian Vettel in 12th too for Aston Martin, so at least they'll be happy to get that single point. And they actually jumped ahead of Haas as well in the Constructors' Championship, so not second last anymore of those guys. Magnussen, so mentioned Mick, obviously, with the reliability problem, but Magnussen unfortunately got front wing damage on the first lap, probably coming together with his old mate Lewis Hamilton again, so he had to pit early, get a new front wing, and pretty much lost out and dropped to the back of the grid as well, so he was, I think, last of the classified runners, down in 16th, behind Nicholas Latifi too, who... Has he raced his last race in F1? Who knows? Bit of news around Oscar Piastri anyway, from Alpine. So team boss Otmar Zafnauer saying that it is certain that we'll see Piastri on the grid in 2023. That, doesn't necessarily say he'll be in an Alpine, given the fact that, we expect Alonso to stick around and Ocon's got his deal. But are they going to loan him out to Williams, for example, as has been touted? So, and could it possibly be as soon as the next race, maybe, in Silverstone, as has been discussed also? Well, that kind of contradicts the fact that there was news that Piastri will make his FP1 debut at the French Grand Prix, which comes after Silverstone on this occasion. So that only came out yesterday. So unless that is all just, smoke and mirrors and, trying to distract everyone from what's actually going on, who knows? We'll find out when we get to Silverstone next week. But for now, it's safe to say that we won't see Latifi on the grid next year and that we'll have the young Aussie there. Also, we had Franz Tost. Sorry, I don't know. Well, I think, on my notes I've written Toast by accident, or that was the autocorrect. Sorry about that. Franz Tost, 100% as well on Pierre Gasly staying put at AlphaTauri next season. Now, this wasn't backed up by any official press release or, confirmation from Gasly that he's going to be there next year. If it's the case, then that's very sad, for him to see out another season there at the Red Bull sister team, let's call it. It's not really a junior team anymore. It's not like they have many drivers that they're going to be rushing in to replace him anyway, given what's happened with young Yuri Vips this week. I don't need to go into talking about that. It's a bit of a bonehead kind of move on his part, but, that's kids these days. Especially in that position where, you're expected to be on your best behaviour. So, it's not that hard to just stay clean or whatever. Anyway, so there's not much going on in the Red Bull talent pool at the moment, so maybe for the team it is good that they hang on to Gasly, but at the same time, as Gasly, you want to spread your wings, you want to go beyond the Red Bull family, you want to go to another team, try and, make a name for yourself there. So who knows if that's going to happen, but he's not been officially confirmed, so we don't know yet. That could change when the silly season ramps up, as it will do kind of this time of the year in the next month or so, so it will be interesting. Other than that, there's not really much to Canada, apart from, the bouncing and the porpoising problems was a big talking point. I pretty much summed it up and said, look, it's pretty silly that, if they change anything now, or mid-season, because of one team's demands or whatever, or requests, as I should say. And yeah, looking forward to Silverstone in a couple of weeks' time. Alright, let's do Supercars now then, Darwin Triple Crown. So, I just get so envious watching Darwin usually, because Supercars always talk about it being, their escape from the winter down south, where I happen to be. up to the Northern Territory, north of Australia. It's, tropical, it's beautiful. There's just more sunshine. I feel like I'm going real pale, just sitting here in the cold or whatever at the moment. But no, good to see them back at Hidden Valley Raceway. It's one of those tracks that we've had plenty of racing at over the past few years, especially with COVID, seeing the championship not be able to go to all its usual venues. I'm pretty sure they did a double header there last year too, or maybe it was the year before, I'm not too sure. Exciting as always. I was happy last week, as I discussed, about it being the official Indigenous round as well, so it was good to see those liveries out on track and the way that the championship itself and the category had engaged as well throughout the weekend and everything. So yeah, that was really good. Had some good racing too. My favourite moment, I guess, race 18, the safety car setting up a very, very close finish at the end. So coming into that, of course, we had Chaz Mostert starting from 5th, I believe, in that race. 6th it was, and stopping early on in the race on lap 9 for 2 tyres. So, of course, in Supercars, you can change as many tyres as you want as long as it's minimum 2 tyres. So you could change 3 tyres, as we saw Shane Van Gisbergen do. And then, of course, 4 tyre stops for both the Shell V-Power racing cars. Much later on, mind you, we had an incident between Gary Jacobson and the rookie Zach Best, who was a wild card for Tickford this weekend. And it was a bit of a stupid incident, honestly. And then, of course, the news coming out a couple of days ago about Gary Jacobson losing his seat there at Premier Racing ahead of Townsville. It kind of sums up, the move that he made over the weekend. And he was involved in quite a few incidents with Jacobson. So in the end, it's kind of good riddance to that, unfortunately. But yeah, Best got sent off into the valley, or that's the part of the track they call the valley. He didn't get sent to the nether regions or whatever of the universe. But they had to pull out a safety car, compress the field. It was in on lap 30. And then from there, you had Mostert, who had track position. You had 3 cars behind him on fresher tyres. Anton De Pasquale hunting a second win of the weekend potentially. Will Davison, who had celebrated his 500th race as well earlier in the weekend, and then of course Shane Van Gisbergen, who just wins everything. But Chaz did a great job. This is why he's a 2-time Bathurst champion and multiple race winner. He did an amazing job to stay ahead, and the fact that the commentators, even when the safety car came out, said that this is ruined Mostert's race, he's not going to survive this. It actually, I was thinking the opposite, because I'm like, well, actually, laps behind the safety car is probably going to put less pressure on his tyres, even though everything's going to cool off and all that. It's actually going to help him preserve a bit of life in those tyres, and then he can go out all out defence at the end of the race. And I thought, as long as he goes out with a fight, if he doesn't win, he doesn't win. But he was able to fight at the end. But he was able to hold on, and that was so good. So Mostert finishing ahead of De Pasquale. There was a bit of criticism for De Pasquale in some corners, in certain corners of the internet. That he, again, like Sainz, couldn't get the job done. He doesn't have the killer instinct, yada yada. There's just there's no base to that. Like, just get over yourselves, guys. It was a great job for Mostert to be able to do that. It was still a great weekend for Anton anyway, because he won the round. He won the Triple Crown with the win that he had in race 16. His first win of the season too, mind you. He hasn't won a race in 2022 until the first race of the weekend. He was 4th in race 17, just missing out on the podium behind Van Gisbergen, and then of course finishing behind Chaz there in the final race of the weekend. But yeah, I just can't get over that finish. I think I've watched the replay of that race a couple of times this week and just really enjoyed it. And then behind those two, you had Cameron Waters rounding out the top 3. You had also on the restart of that race on lap 30, Shane and Davison coming to blows as well. So we had Waters pretty much inherit that podium place because Van Gisbergen just pretty much escorted Davison off or whatever, and then ended up having some power steering damage, which then saw him drop through the field and pretty much finished last, and then he copped a penalty as well. So he was still classified and scored points. It probably made more of a mess of Davison's race than Shane's, given the fact that, Van Gisbergen is quite a while ahead in the championship, but that gap has come down between he and De Pasquale. But, very strange to have a weekend this season that Van Gisbergen hasn't won. So, this was his first winless weekend of the season, so there's not much more to say to that. He had an off weekend, but, what do you say? It's still Van Gisbergen. You still expect him to bounce back stronger in Townsville, and Townsville is a circuit that Triple Eight and Gizzy do quite well at anyway. The gap between him and De Pasquale is 214 points, but, it's still quite a while away, for that gap to be cut down. When you look down to the rest of the field, Waters is 288 behind, 294 to Davison, which is almost a round's worth of points, and then you've got David Reynolds and Chaz Mostert there, 5th and 6th for 470 and 474 points behind, so it's looking very difficult for those guys. And for Mostert, the win on Sunday too kind of felt like redemption for what had happened earlier in the weekend. He copped not one, but a pair of disqualifications. First in FP2 for a tyre pressure breach, and of course, this was the first weekend that we had the new rules around minimum tyre pressures in Supercars, and then also the banning of leaving tyres out in the pit lane in the sun to bake, as it was, to kind of rate, because they don't have tyre blankets like they do in F1 in Supercars. So any way that they can get temperature into those tyres, they will do so. But that was clamped down upon this weekend, so he got disqualified for that first. And then second of all, getting disqualified for having an air fan or air blower in the front wing of his car before the start of race 16, which was the first race of the weekend. Now, that was found to have been in breach of directive 8.1.8, which, you're not allowed to have any kind of cooling devices on the grid with the car beyond a certain time or whatever it is. And, it's all very fair, I guess, in the sense that it's a cost-cutting measure, and the rules are quite black and white around it. There's no interpretation. So, Paul Walkinshaw and Andretti United, they had to deal with issue potentially that Mostert had found on the car before the race. And they basically didn't think they would get caught with this, but, eagle eyes are everywhere. The big brother eyes are watching. In this case, I think it was Adrian Burgess, who the head of motorsport, who caught them out in that respect. They got disqualified. He lost 4th place. Walkinshaw then moved to appeal that decision, but only to have their appeal thrown out too, because apparently it wasn't presented to Motorsport Australia quick enough, or within the window that you can present an appeal. So at the end of the day, they they were found guilty of breaking the rules, yada yada yada. But I think what shocked most was the severity of the penalty. I'm happy in this instance we got black and white rules around this, and there's no interpretations, and that the fact that, if someone else does it differently next time, that they'll get let go, or there's a less harsh penalty. But, the fact that they got disqualified from that was a bit whoa. Did it give them an advantage? Did they win the race? No. That's the thing that I would look at and be well, it didn't mean that they finished 30 seconds ahead of the pack, and everything like that. So that was a bit, when you look at that, I thought that was very severe in that respect, but more so for Mostert's championship, because it cost him 80 points as well for losing that P4. And then when you look at the weekend that they had there in Perth as well, it was a bit shocking. So that's kind of sums up where he's at in the championship at the moment, and why he's that far behind. But a return to form for him on Sunday, winning race 18. So that was that. Most of the on-track stuff, as I said, the move from Jacobsen, which you could argue has pretty much cost him his drive there in Supercars and in Premier Racing. No news yet on who will replace him from Townsville. There's been talk potentially of Zane Goddard, of course, who was on the bench this season and has a drive for Tickford in the Enduro Cup. I don't think someone like Fabian Coulthard, who was driving for that team under the previous ownership of the Techno last season, will want to give up his Plum Enduro drive with Mostert and Walkinshaw Andretti United for returning to the back of the grid. So we'll see who will pick up that seat in the coming days. I don't think it'll be days, but coming weeks, I should say, because Townsville will not be for some time yet. It will be in the middle of July. And yeah, we had confirmation too over the weekend that Pukekohe and Sandown will be going ahead. So there was a bit of speculation coming into the weekend about whether Supercars might have to can, one, maybe two of those rounds. And, that would then throw into question the minimum rounds that they've got to have in the championship to make up the broadcast arrangement, which is 12 rounds, but they've done another back-to-back at Sydney Motorsport Park. I certainly hope not. But that's not going to happen because those 2 rounds have been confirmed. The problem around Pukekohe and going to New Zealand was the monumental freight costs. Apparently that's been causing an issue for Supercars, but of course they've managed to work around that with some local partners, and then also making it a 3-day event as well, I think, to get as many people to the races as possible. And listening to Nick Percat separately talk about his frustration with people who are against the Adelaide 500 and all that, and whinging and whining about why it's not good for them. Percat made a good point in that motorsport globally at the moment is doing so well. Whether you look at attendance in F1, IndyCar, WEC, it's great. And the fact that most nations and most cities and most populations are coming out of severe COVID restrictions, and they're craving entertainment, they're craving live things, music, sport, whatever. So yeah, like the fact that Supercars have not gone to New Zealand for 2 years should make this one of the most anticipated events to happen there, one of the most anticipated Auckland Super Sprints or Pukekohe Super Sprints that we're going to have in years. So, the fact that you got Van Gisbergen in such good form, even though they've lost Scotty McLaughlin in that time as well. The fact that Van Gisbergen's doing well is going to still put bums on seats. So it's going to more than justify them going over there. Sandown too is good. It's with a heavy heart that, I talk about Sandown, given the fact that, the future of that race is, not looking very well. And, in a couple of years' time, it will be torn down, or if not sooner, be torn down and built into like a housing estate, like Oran Park is at the moment. So, let's get as much Sandown action in as we can before it's all housing or whatever. So that will be good to see that. And also the best news is that Adelaide 500 is definitely on as well. That came out today in relation to the Nick Percat story as well. Him talking about, they need to embrace, or Adelaide people need to embrace the race a bit more because it is quite important for local business and everything. So the news that it is going ahead this year, of course, originally in my notes I had it down as, there's still, potential that it might not happen, and that's why Supercars moved to confirm going to Sandown and Pukekohe to cover those minimum 12 rounds so that we still have a legitimate championship. But we're going to finish off in Adelaide. It's locked in until 2026 as well as the season finale, so there's going to be that whole vibe about, Adelaide like it was in Formula 1 for so many years as the season finale. That'll be great. And yeah, hopefully tickets will go on soon so I can snatch them up, and I'll be there this year. We'll be there in Adelaide, so looking forward to it. It still leaves a few question marks around Newcastle as well. It's still listed as TBA, but I just have a feeling it's not going to go ahead this year. I mean, where are you going to fit it in? There's obviously a gap between, the final scheduled round at the Gold Coast, and then the proposed Adelaide round, in the first weekend of December. And I feel like it's, too much going in and having another street race in between when you look at costs being the reasons around not wanting to go to New Zealand originally. So it's best to keep Newcastle in the bank until 2023, as much as it'd be good to see a circuit that we haven't seen for a couple of years back there. But given the fact that it's going to be the opening round of the 23 championship, I think, I can wait another couple of months until end of Feb or March for that to come in. So, yeah, that pretty much sums up that one anyway. Thank you very much again. Be sure to stay tuned on socials for everything to do with this podcast. Of course, at Hit the Apex Media on Twitter, and there's also a Linktree associated with all my other work out there. Glad to have a break this weekend from racing. I think my sleep patterns need to recover a little bit. It's been quite hectic over the past few weeks, and I think that's what double headers are doing to me now, is that with the odd time zones and whatnot, is I just feel very frazzled. So I think, having some very proper sleep this weekend is going to get me back in order. And then also, I will not be doing a show next week, of course, ahead of the British Grand Prix, but you will catch me after the British Grand Prix, and a special guest as well, which I've got lined up too. So we'll talk all things British Grand Prix after that and look ahead to Austria. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. Have a good weekend. Enjoy whatever you're doing, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.